going to meet some people who are astoundingly lucky to have survived harrowing ordeals. These are the top 10 lucky people to be alive. With that brief intro done, let's begin, shall we? Number 10. Bill Morgan. Bill Morgan was the victim of a horrendous trucking accident that nearly cost him his life. However, even though he survived his physical injuries, the ordeal immediately triggered a heart attack. Morgan was then rushed to the hospital for treatment, but once there he was administered a medication to which he was viciously allergic, and his heart had stopped. In total, Morgan would go for 14 minutes without his heart beating. This is when the difficult decision was made to remove him from life support. But when they did, he started breathing on his own, and went on to make a full recovery in just 12 days. Seriously though, those events are just like dominoes for that guy. Number 9. Edwin E. Robinson. In 1980, Edwin E. Robinson was struck by lightning and survived. Now, just that feat alone could possibly earn him a spot on this list, but what's even more incredible is that Robinson was both hearing impaired and blind. However, miraculously following the lightning strike, doctors documented that both senses had returned fully. Number 8. Tsutomu Yamaguchi. When the United States dropped atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the course of history was forever changed, and perhaps no one knows the impact better than Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Yamaguchi was not only in Hiroshima when the bomb dropped, but he was fortunate to survive and rushed home to his family in Nagasaki. And then only to see the second bomb fall there just 3 days later and once again survive. Man, again, dominoes. Number 7. Nichiren. Nichiren was a key figure during the Third Age of Buddhism, but he might also be one of the luckiest men in history. After taking a stand against the government, Nichiren was sentenced to be executed by a sword. However, it is said that as the executioner hoisted the sword in the air, he was struck by lightning. Fearing divine intervention, his execution was stayed, and he was instead exiled to Sadao Island. Perhaps Nichiren was spared by an ancient deity, or perhaps he's just really friggin' lucky. Number 6. Frayne Salak. Frayne Salak is either one of the luckiest or the unluckiest entries on today's list, and that's saying something given our past few ones. It all started when he took a train ride in 1962. Tragically, the train derailed and flew into the near-freezing river. Miraculously enough, he survived with just a broken arm and hypothermia. The following year, he was on a flight when the door of the plane flew off, yanking 20 passengers from the plane, the only survivor of which was Salak, who landed in a large haystack. 3 years later, in 1966, he was on a long-distance bus trip when the vehicle veered off the road and into a river, and yeah, I think you can take a guess as, who survived here. He swam to safety with just a few scratches. In 1970, his car caught fire, and he escaped only moments before the fuel tank exploded. 3 years later, a malfunction caused a different vehicle to shoot flames out of the interior vents, singeing nearly all the hair off of his head. Nearly 2 decades later, he was struck by a bus, and in 1996, his car flew over a guardrail and plummeted 300 feet into a canyon. Salak, however, was ejected from the vehicle and clung to a nearby tree, sparing him the fall. So just a quick recap of these many events. That's a train crash, a plane crash, a bus crash, a car explosion, a face full of flames, and he barely avoided falling 300 feet in a car. Oh, but just in case that wasn't enough to prove his unbelievable luck, Salak also won the lottery in 2003. I bet you anything the next thing we're gonna hear is he lost it, then found it again. Number 5. Vesna Volovic. Vesna Volovic was a Serbian flight attendant who was on board a flight departing from Copenhagen Airport on January 26, 1972. Unbeknownst to the crew, the flight was to be the target of a ruthless terrorist attack. Sometime after 4 a.m., an immensely powerful briefcase bomb tore through the plane in half. 18 lives were sadly lost that day. However, against all possible odds, Volovic would survive. Upon closer investigation, it was determined that her survival boiled down to an amazing series of coincidences. When the plane initially detonated, Volovic was pinned by a food cart, so she wasn't ejected from the aircraft when it depressurized. Furthermore, when the portion of the fuselage that she was in reached the ground, it landed in a heavy patch of trees which effectively cushioned the landing. Despite this, her injuries were severe and she cried out in pain. This drew the attention of a nearby World War II veteran who had happened to be a medic. His unique skill set allowed him to keep her stable until rescue crews arrived. This incredibly lucky flight attendant went on to be a political activist and live a long life, all thanks to an incredible series of events. Number 4. Jan Balsrud. As a Swedish soldier, Balsrud fought against the German invasion in Norway, but was expelled from the country under accusations of espionage. Undeterred, him and 2 other commandos joined forces with 8 members of a boat crew. Their goal was to destroy a German control tower. Unfortunately, their plan was foiled when they were attacked by a German vessel. The attack left Balsrud and other survivors swimming in the ice-cold Arctic waters, but he was the only one to reach land without being captured. For the next month, Jan Balsrud lived behind enemy lines, trying desperately to make his way back to neutral territory. Throughout his ordeal, Balsrud was forced to amputate 9 of his own toes with a pocket knife to prevent the spread of frostbite. Balsrud eventually joined forces with a handful of fellow Norwegians who escorted him into Finland, where he was then cared for by native Finno-Scandinavian, who pulled him with a reindeer-drawn sled to neutral Sweden. This incredible story sounds almost too astonishing to be true, and he was eventually appointed an honorary member of the Order of the British Empire by Britain, as well as received the St. Olav's Medal with Oak Branch. Because he is truly lucky to have survived, Jan Balsrud comes in at number 4 on today's list. Number 3. Julianne Kopec. The daughter of a biologist and an ornithologist who often spent months in the Peruvian rainforest, Julianne Kopec was already well versed in some basic survival techniques by the age of 17, but she never imagined how important they would wind up being one day. On Christmas Eve 1971, Julianne and her mother were on a plane bound for Panguana. Much to her father's disappointment, they had booked the flight with Líneas Aéreas Nacionales S.A., otherwise known as LANSA, an airline with a notoriously bad safety record. During the flight, their plane was struck by lightning and blew to pieces in midair. Julianne, still strapped in her chair, fell 2 miles into the jungle below. The explosion and resulting fall left the young girl slightly battered with a broken collarbone, a gash on her right arm, and her right eye swollen shut. Despite her injury, she had survived the fall, but at the age of just 17, her survival was almost entirely in her hands. Though injured, she found a small number of packaged sweets from the plane and began to make her way downstream, a technique for finding civilization that she had been taught as a child. For 10 days, she moved along the stream, but soon she had run out of food and her wounds had become infected and filled with maggots. On the 10th day, she came across a boat in a small shelter. She took shelter there overnight, and the following morning was discovered by local fishermen who brought her to a nearby village. Since then, her harrowing story has been the focus of multiple films, including the 1998 Werner Herzog film Wings of Hope. Now it's time for today's best pick. My top pick for today is a truly close call that is noteworthy. Number 2. This picture. This up-and-coming social media influencer, Jenny McKindle, was parasailing with some friends off the coast of Australia when she decided to capture some footage for her breakout video. But in this screenshot from the footage, we see that she is being closely followed by a highly predatory shark. Only moments after this, a downdraft pushed McKindle into the water. Dazed and confused, she started to try and get her bearings, but just as she did, she was hit by a phenomenal force that she would later describe as being like a freight train. A massive great white had grabbed her by the midsection and began dragging her further down. McKindle was losing blood quickly and she began to lose hope. McKindle was an experienced swimmer and managed to control her breathing as best as possible. Realizing that she was mortally wounded, she took a last-ditch effort at swimming to the surface. Meanwhile, in the boat, her friends were aware of what had happened and feared the worst. A shark deterrent device known as a shark shield emits electronic waves that repel sharks, and luckily for McKindle, there was one in the boat, and just as the shark was about to latch onto her for a second time, 3 of her friends arrived carrying the shark shield. The attacking shark quickly retreated, and McKindle was rushed back to shore. Not a moment too soon either, as she still had time to seek medical attention. The attending surgeon said that had the shark's teeth penetrated a 1/4 inch higher than they did, that her lungs would have been compromised, and this story might not have had a happy ending. Unfortunately, while McKindle did post the video, it has since been deleted and she has limited her presence on social media since the incident.
I saved the best for last, but first, I have a quick challenge that takes only 5 seconds to complete. If you can leave a like and subscribe within the next 5 seconds, you'll get 10 years of amazing luck. Just try it, it really works.
Number 1. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates were both experienced mountaineers and avid thrill seekers, so it was no surprise when the pair decided to team up and take on Ciudad Grande in Peru. In 1985, the west face of Cielo Grande had never been scaled, and that made the challenge even more enticing for them. With equipment and the know-how to use it, the men set off on an adventure that would change both of their lives forever. The climb was long and grueling, but the men reached the summit and proclaimed their victory over the ascent. The only thing that remained was for them to make their way back down. Unfortunately, shortly after they began, a major storm blew in, one that neither Simpson nor Yates could have possibly predicted. The climb up had already taken longer than either of them had banked on, and their supplies were badly depleted. They knew that the trip back down would have to be fast and efficient. Unfortunately, during the storm and attempted descent, Simpson fell and severely injured his right knee and tibia. This meant that the remainder of the descent would be even more challenging when the pair came to a 300-meter drop and they decided to lower the injured Simpson on ropes. Once he was down, he would have to unhook himself and wait for Yates to come along behind him. The massive storm meant that they couldn't see what was happening, and Simpson was accidentally lowered over a higher section of the cliff. With Simpson unable to reach the ground, Yates unable to pull him back up, both men unable to see the ground or hear each other, the situation was dire. After clutching the rope for over an hour, Yates knew they would both die if he didn't do something quickly, so he did the only thing he could and he cut Simpson free. Simpson then plummeted 150 feet into a deep crevasse. Yates realized the situation when he himself descended, finding no trace of Simpson. He then returned to base camp, assuming the worst. Miraculously, Yates spent the next 3 days crawling and hopping over 5 miles. Somehow, against all odds, he reached the base camp just as a team arrived to evacuate Simpson. Their unbelievable tale has been recounted in a book, a movie, and a live play. Which story of impossible survival was your favorite? Are you or someone you know lucky to be alive? Let me know in the comment section down below. With all that said and done, that's our video for today, and I'll see you all next time. Later, everybody.